Have you ever noticed that mastering a totally complex topic doesn't actually require a complex answer? In fact, it's pretty much the exact opposite. The real true mark of mastery is being able to distill something massive, something incredibly complicated, down into its absolute simplest form. Honestly, if you can't explain a concept simply, you probably just don't understand it well enough yet. So today, in this explainer, we are diving into a pedagogical framework that completely flips how we look at learning and problem solving. We're going to unpack the psychology behind why we constantly overcomplicate things and how a very specific, targeted approach can literally tear down those artificial walls to our understanding.
So why do simple questions often feel so impossible to answer? If you've ever been a student or really just tried to learn any new skill at work, you know this feeling. We've all been there. You're staring at an assignment and the actual core question is just completely buried under these thick, heavy layers of dense academic jargon. It is incredibly overwhelming. But the absolute real game changer here is realizing that the problem usually isn't the concept itself. The problem is the packaging. We are constantly dealing with these artificial barriers. Maybe it's academic pressure or just the fear of sounding, unprofessional if we don't use big, fancy words. But all that does is create a massive cognitive load that completely distracts us from the actual answer. And that brings us to an absolutely fascinating real-world case study, the Gyan Kunja Tuition Center. Rather than just doing the standard, run-of-the-mill tutoring where a teacher just kind of talks at a student for an hour, their entire foundational approach is built around dismantling that artificial complexity we just talked about. It's a brilliant model for fighting back against academic jargon. When a learner is stuck in that super frustrating maze of big words, the methodology used by this center steps in to transform those tangled, overwhelming problems into perfectly manageable, bite-sized concepts. It's really an exercise in translation, taking the totally obtuse and making it completely accessible for anyone. Okay, so how does this actually work in practice? Well, the methodology breaks down into 3 really distinct steps. Step 1 is simply to read the complex question. Now, I know that sounds incredibly basic, but it's really about just taking the information in without that immediate overwhelming panic of trying to solve it right that second. Step 2 is where the magic happens. Break down the jargon. This is the crucial translation phase. Imagine a test asking you to, say, evaluate the pedagogical implications of continuous formative assessment. Breaking that down means stripping away all that overly academic fluff to find the core issue. What it's really asking is just, how does constant grading affect how students learn? You just strip away the unnecessary words. And finally, step 3, deliver a simple explanation. By systematically crossing out that confusing vocabulary, all the chaos completely vanishes. It turns a high-stress hurdle into a super calm, straightforward process of logic. To really get this, we have to look at the massive cognitive shift a student actually goes through. Think about the before state. Trying to decipher heavy material all by yourself usually leads to total mental overload. It's that frustration, the confusion, literally feeling like you're banging your head against a brick wall because you're fighting the language, not the concept. Now, contrast that with the after state. Once that mental friction is totally gone because you broke down the jargon, what's left is just profound clarity. It is the absolute relief of a simple explanation. It's the difference between being completely lost and experiencing that incredibly satisfying moment when the underlying logic finally clicks in your brain. What's really cool is how the visual metaphor of the Gyan Kunja crest actually reflects this exact philosophy. The elements of their logos serve as a literal map of their pedagogical approach. First, you have the open book, representing open, accessible knowledge that isn't hidden behind a wall of confusing language. Then, right in the center, the pen nib stands for absolute precision. It's about targeted, laser-focused understanding instead of rambling explanations. Above that, the radiating light illustrates the illumination of the mind. That amazing aha moment when a tough idea makes perfect sense. And wrapping the whole shebang together are the laurel leaves, the classic, historic symbol of academic victory. It perfectly represents guiding a student out of the darkness of confusion and into the light of total clarity. The core philosophy driving this whole thing is summed up perfectly. Explain the questions with simple explanation. It sounds almost deceptively basic, right? But it is a profoundly effective framework. The mental effort it actually takes to distill complex thoughts into plain, everyday language is immense. It forces the person explaining to really grapple with the material, to basically test the absolute limits of their own knowledge. And honestly, this is the biggest takeaway for us today. Cutting through the noise with simple, direct explanations isn't just a shortcut. It is absolutely the key to unlocking your true academic and professional potential. Because when you can strip away the jargon and explain something simply,
you prove without a doubt that you truly understand it.
Thank you so much for joining us for this explainer today.
If you found this breakdown helpful and you want to keep cutting through the noise with us, please make sure to like, share, and subscribe.
So, I want to leave you with one final question to ponder. What complex concept are you going to conquer next using the Gyeongkunja framework? The next time you run into heavy jargon, don't let the language intimidate you. Remember the steps. Break the vocabulary down, strip away the noise, and find that simple explanation. Keep learning, keep pushing those intellectual boundaries, and we will see you in the next explainer.